Welcome back to Poison Pose. This video is part 2 of the last lesson, Standard 10 Samacheer Kalvi. If you have not yet watched part 1, please go to this description, click on to the link and watch part 1 before you start with part 2. Let us continue with the lesson. My last French lesson. Why I hardly knew how to write. I should never learn any more. I must stop there then. Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons, for seeking birds' eggs or going sliding on the Sar. My books that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the saints, were old friends now that I couldn't give up. And M. Hamill, too. The idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. This paragraph says that my last French lesson. The fellow says this must be my last French lesson. And how hard it was to study French, how hard it is to write French. So I will stop everything here itself. I don't want to study anymore. But he also feels that he has wasted his time without studying how to write and read French. He was seeking birds' eggs and going sliding on the Saar. Saar is a river in northeastern France and West Germany. It is a river which is in between this Germany and France. This is River Saar. So he was playing in this river, and he also says that such so many days this was a nuisance for me to take the books. Nuisance means something that annoys, which you don't like. So I did not like to carry these books. It was so heavy to carry, but now they are looking like my old friends that I don't want to give up those books. I don't want to keep it somewhere. And the master too, he had no idea he was going away. He was feeling so sad that the master is going away. When he thinks about that the master is going to leave and he's not going to teach anymore, he forgot about his ruler and how cranky he was, which says that this little fellow, he forgot about how badly his master used to whack him and how cranky he was. Only thing that was in his head was the master is going to leave the next day. Cranky means bad tempered. Poor man, it was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes, and now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. Now, here he says that, yeah, poor old man. This is why he has come dressed up so nicely, like he was on a Sunday clothes. Sunday clothes means only on Sundays when they go to the church, they dress up nicely and they go to the church. So that is what is referred here. This man, the master, has come to school in such a nice dress because it was his last day to the school. And the little fellow, he realizes that this is the reason that the old men of the village have come and sat inside the classroom in the back benches. It was because they were sorry too that they had not gone to school more. It was their way of thanking our master for 40 years of faithful service and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. This is a sad sentence, right? Now, when this little fellow understood that this was the reason the old men of the village were sitting there, just to be thankful, to say thank you for the master for teaching 40 years in that school, the faithful service that he has rendered in teaching French to the people of that country. While I was thinking all of this, I heard my name called. It was my turn to recite. Now he was just this little fellow was sitting and dreaming about things and thinking, pondering over what is going to happen, and suddenly his name was called. He was asked to recite, and he didn't even have an idea of what was going on there in the class. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle all through, very loud and clear and without one mistake? Now, here, this was the feeling of everyone, because being a last day, once the question was asked, he was about to stand up and say everything without any fear. But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there holding on to my desk, my heart beating and not daring to look up. But he knows nothing to answer. So he stood up holding the desk and his heart was beating very fast. He didn't even dare to look up. Dreadful means very bad. I heard Hamel say to me, I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, Bah, I've plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow. And now you see where we've come out. Now the master is getting angry. He's getting frustrated. So he says, No, little Franz, I'm not going to scold you at all. You should feel bad for yourself. See where you have come and where you are standing. So many days you were saying that you will learn tomorrow, you have a plenty of time to learn, but now see where you are standing. You cannot learn it anymore. Ah, that's the great trouble with Alsace. She put off learning it till tomorrow. Now, those fellows out there will have the right to say to you, How is it you pretend to be Frenchmen and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language? This could be a biggest shame, right? Now he's asking, how will you go out and talk to the other people saying that you are a Frenchman? Are you going to pretend to be a Frenchman? Pretend means to behave as if something is true. You don't know French, you can neither speak nor write in French. And how can you say that is your own language? But you are not the worst, poor little France. We've all a great deal to reproach ourselves. He says, No, it is not your mistake, little fellow. Reproach means to blame someone. We all have something to blame ourselves. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. Anxious means worried. Your parents were not worried about what you learn or what you write. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills so as to have a little more money. And I've been to blame also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? Now the master is blaming himself as well. First, he says, It is your fault you have not yet learnt anything. Second, he blames the parents. He says, Your parents are not worried whether you learn or not. And the third thing, he blames himself. He says that I have to be blamed because I sent you when you did not study anything properly. I sent you to the garden to water my plants, and when I felt like I wanted to go for fishing, I gave you a holiday. So I am also to be blamed. Now here he says, the master says that he started to talk about the language. He says that French is the most beautiful language. It is clear and it has the most logical things. Logical means thinking in a sensible way. That we must all guard, that we must all protect the language. We should not leave it to anybody else and hold fast to their language as if they had a key to the prison. Like when you are put inside a prison and the key is given to you, it is easy for you to escape from that. The same way, when you are somewhere, this language will act as a key for you. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. And he said, seemed so easy, so easy. I think too that I had never listened to so carefully and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. Here in these lines, he opens up the grammar book and reads a lesson. He was amazed to see how well I understood it. Amazed means surprised. And he said, seemed to so easy. And the little fellow feels that it is so easy to learn French. It wasn't so difficult at all. Why didn't I learn this French language so many days? And he feels that for so many days, have he not listened so carefully, or only today is the master teaching everything with so much of patience? Because he was able to understand everything from the lesson, that whatever the master was teaching. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give all he knew before going away, and he put it all into our heads at one stroke. This poor man, the master, he wanted, being the last day, he wanted to push everything into the head of these children in one stroke, because he cannot teach them anymore. That was what this line says. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, Hamel had new copies for us written in a beautiful round hand. Franzelas, Franzelas. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desk. Now, after the grammar classes were over, some writing work were given for the children, and he gave some copies, maybe like some worksheets for the children. So those copies were written in a round hand, beautiful handwriting, and it was written Franzelis, Franzelis. They looked like little flags. When these papers were given to those children, it looked like little flags which were hanging in a rod on top of the desk. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over paper. Scratching means writing on the paper. So none of the pin drop silence that we say, like the same way the class was so quiet and all the children, they were doing their work. The only sound heard in the classroom was the writing, pen writing on the paper, that scratching sound. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that too was French. Now, suddenly, a beetle, an insect which came inside, it flew inside the classroom, but nobody paid attention. Even the small little ones, they too did not notice that. They did not pay attention to the beetle. They were sitting and tracing the fish hooks. Some fish hook picture was given in the paper, and they were tracing on that, thinking that that too was French. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Now, here on the roof, there were some pigeons, they were making some noise. The sound of pigeon is called as cooing. So these pigeons, they were cooing over there, and this little fellow was thinking to himself, will the Germans make even the pigeons to talk in German? Will they also sing in German? Because these children are not allowed to learn French from the next day. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Now, here, whenever this fellow, as he was writing, whenever he looked up and saw the master was sitting motionless. He was not moving at all. He was sitting on the chair, gazing at something, means looking straight into something without moving the eyes. So he was gazing at one thing for at a time, and after some time, he was looking at another, as if he was fixing everything in his mind, like he cannot see that again. So he was fixing, taking a picture of everything in his mind. Fancy, for 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him, just like that. So, for almost 40 years, he was teaching grammar and French for these children, and the same place with a garden outside his window. The classroom was right in front of him. Everything is going to be lost from the next day. Only the desk and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hop-vine that had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. Here in the picture, can you see the hop-vine which is twining onto the window? The same way, the trees, walnut trees, have grown tall in the garden, and these vine trees, they have twined means twisted onto the window and climbing up to the roof. How it must have broken their heart to leave it all, poor man. To hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country next day. So now they have to leave the country, and his sister is packing all the trunk, the package, the things on the top floor. So this was heard down. So he feels that how broken their heart must be. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history, and then the babies chanted their ba bee bee boo boo. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion. And it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Now, what happened? After the writing classes was over, history lessons started, and all the babies there sitting in the classes, they chanted their Baba Bibi Boo Boo, which is to shout or to sing a word many times. We usually do in the class. The teachers, they ask to repeat. When we were in smaller classes, the teacher, they will say a word and we are asked to repeat after them, like how the small kindergarten kids, they say the rhymes. So saying it again and again, that is called as chanting. They were all chanting. Now Hauser, the man with the three corner hat, who was sitting at the back, he put on his spectacles and he stood up and he started to say, chant along with the babies. Now everybody was looking at him. His voice was trembled. Tremble mean to shake. His voice was shaking as if he was about to cry with emotion. Listening to this and looking at him saying the rhymes along with the small children, everyone wanted to laugh, and at the same time, they all wanted to cry. Ha, how well I remember it, that last lesson. All at once, the church clock struck 12. Then the angelus. At the same moment, the trumpet of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. Hamel stood up very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. Now, here what happens? Now, the little fellow, he says that last lesson, he never forgot that last lesson in his lifetime. As the lesson was going on, all at once the church clock, it struck 12. Then the Angelus. Angelus means ringing of church bells announcing the Angelus. The ringing of the bells to say the Roman Catholic churches, they have a prayer which they say in the morning, noon, evening, and night. So that is when they will ring the church bell and together everybody will say the prayer. So that is called as Angelus. So the church clock, it struck 12. Similarly, together at the same time, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from the drill was also sounding under the window. When these two sounds heard together, Hamel stood up. He was looking pale. He was looking very dull, which means. Now, this little fellow, he says that he has never seen Hamel look so tall. He is not talking about the physical tall, no. He was talking about how tall he is, how high he is in his standards. My friends, said he, but something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned on to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could. Vive la France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed, you may go. Now he stood up, the master, Hamel, he stood up. He wanted to say something. He started saying, I, and something choked him. Choking means unable to breathe, something on your throat. You will not be able to say a word. Something choked him. What choked him was the sorrow. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard. He turned towards the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and he started writing on the board. The words that he wrote was Vive la France. The exact meaning of Vive la France means, you cannot give the exact meaning, but Vive la France means long live France. That is the meaning of Vive la France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall. Without a word, he made a gesture. Gesture means movement of the hand or head that expresses something. Without saying the word, you make an action and express whatever you're about to say. That is called as gesture. He made a gesture saying that school is dismissed and you may go. That's the end of the lesson. Thank you for watching this video. Watch part 1 and part 2 together for better understanding. Meet you all in another video.